Hello and welcome. A great day for us. We're very privileged to be joined by Admiral Arun Prakash. Well, most of you already know, of course, who he is. He needs no introduction. But for those who don't, Admiral Arun Prakash is a former chief of the Indian Navy. He's one of India's most well-regarded voices on security affairs. He's held many different posts after, during his career and after as well. His advice, his words are read by millions across the world every single day. Admiral Arun Prakash is also on social media where he comments quite frequently on affairs, defense, and security, and of course, a lot of other things as well. Admiral Prakash, good morning. Thank you very much for taking the time out during this lockdown and being with us. How's the lockdown been for you so far, sir?
COVID-19 has been rather kind to Goa, so we've got relatively some freedom. But one doesn't know what the future holds, so let's hope for the best.
Absolutely, India is unlocking right now. Many of those who followed Admiral Arun Prakash's work do know that one of the issues that's quite close to his heart and which he talks about quite passionately is the issue of self-reliance, the issue of what has become the buzzword of ATMANIRBHARTA nowadays. So I'm going to plunge right into that, Admiral, if you'll allow me, because I've seen your recent tweets as well on this issue, and you've wondered where this Atmanirbharta is actually going to come from. What do you think about it? We hear about it from time to time, this sort of campaign call for self-reliance. Now it's called Atmanirbharta. There are going to be some decisions made to limit the number of things we can actually import. What do you think, sir?
Well, anyone who's concerned about national security cannot but welcome issues like Atmanirbharta. We've had Make in India earlier,
yes,
and now we have Atmanirbharta. So it's a cause for satisfaction. But couple of things one wonders. One is the timing. I mean, in the midst of a pandemic, who's going to pay attention to something like this? But that notwithstanding, still we must welcome it. The other thing is, of course, we've seen many slogans and good intentions. They come and go, but it's the implementation of the whole thing that really matters. So we have to wait and watch. The signs are good. We've made some good noises, but we have to wait and watch how it is actually implemented. Is there a long-term vision underpinning this slogan of Atmanirbharta? Only then it will be fair to comment. But at the outset, well, let's welcome it.
Okay, so you're welcoming it on the outset. The impulse is at least correct as far as self-reliance is concerned, and you would know because the Indian Navy has, unlike the other services, has had to depend a lot on indigenous equipment because of the lead time in inductions and various other factors which I'll come to. But one of the recent things that's been in the news and something that you've also spoken about is the India's own jet, the LCA Tejas. The second Indian Air Force has just come up in Coimbatore. There's been some to and fro which we've seen in the media, between the Chief of Defense Staff and the Chief of Air Staff over whether the LCA Tejas is going to be the way to go and no more imports of other jets. What's your view on that, sir? Do you think that, with what we have on the LCA, we can dispense with plans to, spend good money on foreign jets?
Well, Shiv, to start with, side remark is that it's nice to know that there is a healthy discourse going on such issues of national security. But there's a very elegant Chiefs of Staff Committee room which is meant for these discussions, and they really shouldn't come out in the open. It doesn't sound very nice. Obviously, there are two viewpoints on this issue, and there must be different viewpoints. But they are both valid because you've got to nurture and look after your indigenous industry. And even if the Tejas is not fully capable of what the Indian Air Force may want today, tomorrow or the day after or in a couple of years, it will be. And we are duty bound to support it in every possible way. The other side of the coin is that you need capabilities right now. So the Tejas is not up to the mark for something that the Air Force wants.
Yes.
And if we have to buy from abroad, let's do it. You can't leave voids in the Air Force's capability and then ask them to defend Indian airspace. So you have to do this on a parallel track. Support indigenous industry, bolster them, nurture them. At the same time, keep your capabilities up to the mark, depending on the threats that face. So both points of view are valid and they should live together.
Okay, so you're saying that there is space for the both of them to live together. I couldn't help noticing, sir, when when this whole Atmanirbharta was starting to make headlines a few days ago. I saw a couple of your tweets about the KAVERI engine, and that's something that you've spoken about, repeatedly over the years, because you believe that the KAVERI engine is, at the very, it holds an extremely important place in indigenous capabilities and aviation. It's something you feel very strong about, sir.
Well, you're right, Shiv, because I saw the KAVERI engine for the first time in 1974 when I was doing a course in Bangalore. We went to an establishment called Gas Turbine Research Establishment, and they showed us this model of an actual engine called the GTTX experimental. So we were filled with pride that here we are in the 70s and we already have a gas turbine engine sitting on a test bed. But 50 years have elapsed and there has been very little progress. The KAVERI is still languishing. Now, the point is that if we are going to have an aerospace industry or aeronautical industry, you have to produce a jet engine to power any aircraft that you design or produce. So how can you allow something like, it may not be up to the mark, it doesn't produce enough thrust, it's got flaws, but all these can be rectified. There are people, if not in India, in the rest of the world, who are willing to fix it for you for some money and time. So my view is that if you never make a jet engine, or if you don't make a jet engine today in the 21st century, you will never be able to make it. Technology will overtake you so fast that you will be left behind. So this is possibly the last chance for India to jump on this wagon and get a jet engine going. It may not be perfect, it's only halfway there. Once you make it, then you can improve on it. There seem to be some kind of lobbies which keep pulling it back. The DRDO seems to have cancelled the project. It's quite mystifying who told them to do it, why they are doing it, and now you don't even hear of KAVERI. At the same time, if you look across the Himalayas at the Chinese, they've struggled with their WS-10, as you know, for almost 40 years. They've spent billions on it. That's how it is. The jet engine is not easy to make. The metallurgy, the design, etc. They haven't given up. They made 300 WS-30 WS-10s. Are they going to different versions, powering their aircraft? It is actually flying. So you have to give KAVERI a chance to get airborne and then improve it, make better versions, Mark II, Mark III. It will eventually come up to the mark. But you must not allow KAVERI to die. And that's my appeal to successive Raksha Mantris, but nobody seems to pay attention.
I hope they're still listening because, ultimately, like you said, when you look across the Himalayas and look at how the Chinese have persevered with their jet engine project, it's obviously yielded something, because once you get there, if I get your meaning, is once you get there, the benefits, the spin-offs are going to be huge as far as the aviation industry is concerned. Admiral, apart from jet engines, when we talk about self-reliance, if I had to, I know this is difficult because there is so much that's involved here, but apart from jet engines, if I could pin you down to recommend 5 major capability thrusts that you think should be the focal areas, for this so-called Atmanirbharta in defense, what would you recommend, sir?
Shiv, I'm not the right person to answer a question like this. I've been long retired, but the armed forces have been producing a document. In fact, it was there when I was in service.
Yes.
Called the Technology Roadmap. I think they do it every 1 year or 2, from starting on 2013 onward. And that technology document has about 300 items on the wish list of the armed forces. They they name the item, then they pinpoint the technology that is required to be produced, and that is an open, unclassified document for industry to see, for DRDO to see. So it is extremely mystifying why the DRDO does not home on to this document and pick those technologies and sit with the services and ask them which is your most desirable, most wanted, most urgent technology that we should pursue. And yet, year after year, they have a substantial budget, I think 15,000 odd crores, which they spend as they feel like in pursuit of technology demonstrations. But if I were to answer specifically your questions, I would put my finger on, say, prime movers. We need diesel engines for ships, for submarines, for tanks, for missile transporters. You need gas turbine engines for various applications. You need a small gas turbine engine to power your cruise missile.
Yeah.
That's a technology not many countries have. So prime movers is one. So gas turbines, diesel engines, electric motors to drive ships. So that's one. Electronics, we are lagging behind, and we make radars and electronic warfare. What goes inside them, the microprocessors, the radio frequency generators, magnetrons,
Yeah.
having wave tube. We don't make those chips, semiconductors. Go after that. And weapons, you see in that list, the armed forces want ammunition from 5.56, 7.62, 20 millimeter, 30 millimeter to 155 millimeter ammunition. They want carbines, they want rifles, they want sniper guns, they want 155 millimeters. It's all in that wish list. Why is the DRDO not going after these items? Why are the ordnance factories producing defective ammunition when the wish list is there? The obviously the will is not there, or something is lacking.
Yeah, true. No,
autonomous vehicles, another area where we are lagging. Others are going fast ahead. So these are some of the items that.
Very interesting. So, even when you were in service, Admiral, there have been so many committees, when you were in service, before that, after that, there have been so many committees that have, made specific recommendations on how the DRDO can, shed some of its flab, bring in more focus in terms of more cutting edge or, more fundamental prime mover technologies, like you said. Why, in your view, hasn't it happened, sir? I mean, I myself, and I am not even the most experienced defense journalist in the country. There are people far more experienced than me who've seen committee after committee after committee. I can only imagine how many committees you've seen, recommending how DRDO can better itself.
Well, committees can be formed and their recommendations can be submitted, slogans can be made, etc. But the implementation is the key. Who's going to implement it? It's left again to the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy we've got for various reasons. They've got their hands full with many routine day-to-day things. So implementation of a committee's recommendation will require a major upheaval. Things will have to be broken, reformed, and then established again. There's always a resistance to any change. So committees are received by the ministries and filed away in dusty cupboards. That's been our experience. So what you need is implementation. Who can implement it? Only a minister or politician, an elected representative can implement a recommendation or a change. Unfortunately, our politicians are so engrossed with politics, elections and so on, that very rarely do they find time to apply themselves to their portfolios. This is a clear-cut case where you need political will to change things, to kick butts, if I may use a crude phrase, and change. Otherwise, for 70 years, very little has changed. Let me give you an example. In the Battle of Britain, things were going badly for UK. They were, facing defeat shortly. One of the reasons was that Germany was producing more aircraft than they were getting shot down. So Churchill sent for a man whom he knew, he was a friend, a chap called Lord Beaverbrook. He was not an industrialist or a defense chap. He was a media person, somebody from your world. He was a media baron. So they brought Beaverbrook because he was a dynamo. So within months, he turned around the British aircraft industry, and the RAF acknowledged that it was because of Beaverbrook that they won the battle. So you need to bring a dynamo who will change things, and the dynamo has to be either a politician or maybe someone from private sector who's the energy to do this.
I hope India can find that dynamo. Been totally elusive so far. Okay, now now sort of switching tracks from DRDO to something that's more directly in your world, so which is the Navy. And and one of the things that one of the debates that we've seen happening recently, and experts have had their views, and I've spoken about it as well, as is about the Indian Navy's apparent plans to give up the idea of a third aircraft carrier and possibly instead focus on ramping up its submarine levels because there are clearly not enough resources to have both things or go down both paths. What's your view on that?
Well, frankly, my view is immaterial. This is an issue. It's a issue of far greater magnitude and relevance. It's a national security issue. And again, this is an issue that should be debated and discussed at the highest level of the government. And there should be a national security strategy which will tell us what the Indian state wants. How will the Indian state um, ensure its own security and the maintenance of its interests? So, is it by offensive defense, defensive defense? There are many ways of putting it, but
Yes.
you need to put it down in black and white in the form of a national security strategy. You can't leave it to generals and admirals to have a slanging match in public and say, no, you don't need aircraft carriers, you need strike corps, etc. This is not an issue. So once the government makes up their mind what it wants, and then the government decides how much money it is willing to cough up to ensure national security aims and objectives, then you leave it to the generals and admirals to decide what are the means that you will um, used to ensure national security. And then it becomes an obvious debate as whether submarines or aircraft carriers are a more effective way of implementing national security. And that's the way to find a solution. It's not an issue of prestige.
Yeah.
It's not an issue of who pulls more weight, etc. And that's the way it is to be discussed. But just as an aside, if on one hand we are going to say that we are a regional power, we are a provider of net security in the Indo-Pacific, and at the same time to say that we are not an expeditionary country, we don't need aircraft carriers, we don't need force projection. These two are not compatible.
Right.
So it's for the government to thump the table and say this is what we need and this is what we should get.
Do you have a view on it, sir? Do you have a view on what needs to happen or what path needs to be taken?
Well, aircraft carriers are useful. Yeah. Very useful. They are also vulnerable. Every weapon system in the world is vulnerable. So you have to take a choice. But we are not fighting wars every day. In fact, there's not been a major conflict for many years. Yeah. So aircraft carriers, if we are going to be a power of any significance in the Indian Ocean or Indo-Pacific or whichever part of the world, and you want to project power and influence and go to help people, you see that even right now the Navy ships are sailing all over the place, picking up people, rescuing deserters. Yes. So in that context, an aircraft carrier it sends a very reassuring message to your friends, and it sends a message of deterrence to your adversaries, and it's a very useful weapon platform to have. And if and when war breaks out, there are various ways of protecting it. Yep. The question is of money. You have to decide your priorities. Is it nuclear submarines? Is it aircraft carriers? Is it strike corps or whatever it is?
Absolutely. I mean, important questions are, I agree, it has to happen at the political level because resources are limited and these decisions can't be, slanging matches, like you said, between generals and admirals. Well, most of our viewers and everyone who follows Arun Prakash knows that he's not just a former Navy chief, but has also been a war hero. He flew fighter aircraft during the 1971 war. He was decorated with a Veer Chakra. So he's an aviator par excellence. He's flown all manner of aircraft in service. He was one of the pilots who brought back the Sea Harriers a long time ago. So I want to ask you also about naval aviation, Admiral. Lots of flux there as well. There's been some recent turmoil as far as the LCA. There has been, a proposal for a twin-engine deck-based fighter based on the LCA. We've got the MiG-29Ks. There is a proposal for the, the more advanced deck-based fighters. Then you've got the sort of specter of the F-35 sort of lingering in the backdrop. I know that I'm throwing many things at you, but I want a sort of comprehensive view from you since, I can't think of a better person than you. You're a pilot. You've been the chief. What path do you think naval aviation needs to take?
Yeah, Shiv, that's a very tall order for somebody sitting in the boondocks of Goa. Well, naval aviation is becoming increasingly significant in whatever the, in the maritime domain, whatever you wish to do. And since we have 2 aircraft carriers and they are going to be with us for a number of years, we need to think of how to best arm them. At this moment, we have the MiG-29, 45 of them, maybe 2 squadrons worth. They can do reasonably well. But we also have the LCA, and at great amount of effort and sweat and blood has gone into producing the LCA Navy. It's a unique achievement for our designers and scientists and our test pilots, we prove that we can produce a deck-based fighter. Unfortunately, this particular model of the LCA is not good enough to serve an aircraft carrier. The Navy, of course, hopes that there will be better versions, perhaps a twin-engine version, which will be more capable, which will come, but that'll take a few years to materialize. So the naval aviation, for the time being, is fine with the MiG-29 fighter, maybe for the next 5-7 years, but it will certainly need a more advanced fighter. F-35 is great. It's unaffordable, clearly out of our reach. So we need to get hold of something more affordable in larger numbers, which will either be the advanced naval version of the Tejas or foreign aircraft. I don't want to name any. So, but we will have to get another aircraft to aircraft carriers for the full life of their service. But naval aviation is not just fighters. I mean, there are more important issues also. Anti-submarine warfare, helicopters is a big void for which the Navy has been crying for nearly 2 decades. They seem to be coming up on the horizon, and we need to pursue them with great vigor.
In fact, yes. I mean, the recent deal that India signed with the United States has taken a long time coming, sir, for the Romeo helicopters to replace the Sea Kings. But then there are even more urgent requirements, like you said, for the utility, the basic utility helicopters for the Navy. That's taken so very long.
Yes, today every ship of any reasonable size has to carry a helicopter.
Yeah.
We are still carrying the 60-year-old Alwat Chetak, which flies on a wing and a prayer. There's an urgent need to replace them, and I think we need to find a real via media by which this strategic partnership can be invoked, and we can go into production, the license production as early as possible.
Yeah. Do you think the DRUV, sir, the DRUV has had hasn't really entered the Indian Navy in any meaningful way? Do you think that, and there has again, been some recent writing and debate about why the government should sort of put aside plans to import and look at all these other things and field evaluate and just focus on trying and inducting the DRUV in a big way? Is that a possibility, or has the DRUV fallen between stools as far as naval requirements are concerned?
Well, there's a sad history behind it. The DRUV is a very fine helicopter. I think we should be proud of it. But it has its limitations. It was not produced for the Navy, just like the LCA. But the Navy persevered. We placed an order, a letter of intent for 120 DRUVs as early as 1992-93.
Yeah.
But then it had to fit on a ship's hangar. So we begged and pleaded with HAL that, can you please adapt the rotor blades so that they can fold within a few minutes, and so that the helicopter can fit inside the hangar of a ship which is rolling, pitching. It's on a dark night, bad weather. For 27 years, they have hemmed and hawed and prevaricated. They have not produced an automatic blade fold mechanism, which I'm sure they could have. So without that blade fold mechanism, it's a huge compromise that the Navy has to undertake. They are using the DRUV on ships, but it can only be used during daytime or in calm conditions, etc. It's not a navalized helicopter. It cannot carry significant amount of weapon load. All these things, had HAL shown some initiative, they could have done all these. Increased its payload, modified the rotor blade. So if a company is going to be so lethargic and deadbeat, then how much can you prod them? And then every time the Navy wants to go out and get something, they pop up and say, look, give it to us. I mean, that's very unfair. And somebody should wrap their knuckles with this.
Okay, HAL needs a rap on the knuckles as far as helicopters is concerned. I'm sure for many other things as well. Which brings me to my final question to Admiral Prakash. And I just want to quickly quote, because this is the big story that's on top of everyone's minds right now. Of course, I'm talking about China. And way back in 2005, when I was a young defense journalist, just a year into my job, and Admiral Prakash had given me an interview right after the US Pacific Commander had visited, where Admiral Prakash had said at that time that we are interested in increasing transparency with the PLA Navy, its increasing capabilities at a rate commensurate with the country's economic growth. we wonder what their long-term intentions are, but we're not at all averse to better relations with the PLA. Admiral Prakash, that particular line has stayed with me all these years, and I wonder if it connects in any way with how that dynamic has evolved and what's happening right now in Ladakh, sir.
Well, Shiv, I think I must compliment you for your vision for having asked that question 15 years ago.
Thank you.
But I think today we are facing the problem in what's going on in our north and west, because we really don't understand why the Chinese are doing what they are, especially in the midst of circumstances which are very unpleasant for the whole world.
Yeah.
So had we looked or tried to get an insight into the Chinese mind much earlier, learned Mandarin, studied Chinese history and so on, perhaps we would understand better why they are doing what, because obviously they don't do things without a good reason. So we would have a better understanding of their motivations, and then perhaps we would have been able to tackle them better. Right now, all we are doing is reacting to every time they transgress or what we think is the LSE, we react to that. They build up, we build up, etc. That's not really the way to counter a power like China, which has a long history of such maneuvers. The Chinese are not 10 feet tall, far from it. But nor are they stupid. They are clever people. They are innovative. They are very determined. They have a lot of resolve. And some very good examples are that, once again, the Western intelligence underrated. And they said Chinese technology is backward. They make crude things and so on. They don't work. That's not true. They're almost catching up with America. India and China acquired an old aircraft carrier almost at the same time. They took it home to Dalian, fixed it in 3 years flat, and put it out to sea. Ours took 5-6 years. We went to Russia. You know the whole story.
Yes.
Then people said the Chinese will not be able to learn the esoteric art of carrier flying. It's a great dark mystery. Not so. They learned in 2-3 years. Maybe they had accidents and they lost people. So we should understand our adversary. We should understand what motivates him by learning about his history, his past. And as far as the military is concerned, we are not into history and philosophy, but we should understand their capabilities.
Yes.
Exactly. Their equipment, their hardware, and their capability of their personnel. So it's not too late to find out, because this is a long story that's going to go on. Sino-Indian relations is an ongoing story.
It's a long story that's going to go on. It's going to evolve. I'm, of course, in the media and covering it on a daily basis. There are dramatic things happening there. Some of the things we can report, some of the things we can't report. But it's been a pleasure talking to you, Admiral Prakash. Thank you so much for your time. I wish we could have more time, but I hope in the future we'll have more occasion to speak about these many issues. And I particularly wanted your time because I know you're on social media. We see you way too rarely on television, but it's always excellent to get a sober view on some of these big things that are facing the country at this time. So it's always been a pleasure. I remember you very fondly. And thank you so much, Admiral Prakash, for being with us here. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me, Shiv. Always nice to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.